But you know, I did a whole lot of classical fencing and sport fencing in 1980s and early 90s. So, you know, I'm familiar with quite a lot of the kind of the classical fencing of the late 19th century, which is foil, épée, and saber.
Yes.
So I can fence with those. It's not my main interest because they're no longer sidearms.
Okay. Could you please show us sword and buckler? I mean, just for
Sure.
viewers, that would be lovely.
Okay, so sword can be, it's any kind of simple cross-hilted sword. This is a relatively long one. Sometimes they're quite a bit shorter, but there's nothing in the text to say you should use a particular size weapon. And the buckler is something around this sort of size. It can be quite a bit bigger and they can be a bit smaller. And sometimes they have a big spike in them, which is great. Yeah. And so basically the way this system works is, I mean, first thing is the buckler is always leading because it's there to protect the sword hand primarily. Okay, so whatever position you're in, you're always protecting the sword hand and using your motions to make your opponent deal with your weapon. So the way the system is structured, this is actually quite common until much later. It's represented as this person is in this guard. So I approach like this and they have to respond like this and I deal with it like that, but they could counter like this. Right, so most of it can be sort of parsed out as sort of 4-step drills.
Yeah.
So if, for example, my opponent is in what's called first ward, which is underarm. Okay, so yeah, always have a backup.
Excellent.
Okay, so if your opponent's in first ward,
yeah,
then you might approach with what's called half shield,
yeah,
which controls the line of their direct attack. So from here, their direct attacks are coming up from the left or even possibly down from the left.
yes.
And so you put your weapons over on this side to force them to deal with the weapons. They have no direct attack. Okay, so the person in first ward might fall under, which kind of gets your sword out of the way, and then they can hit you. It's called falling under the sword and shield. And so as you approach the first ward and they fall under, you bind their sword, because the whole point of this was to get their sword from back here, where you don't control it, to out here, where you can control it. So then you get a mechanical control on their weapon and enter in using your buckler to control both their sword and their buckler, and then boom, smack them in the face. And various other things, right? But of course, as this person falls under, as you bind their sword out of the way, they can slip around and hit you in the head. And that's the first sequence from that book, and it gives you the general pattern of how the information is constructed. Because it's worth remembering that these are big, sharp swords, right? Even the relatively little ones are big, sharp swords. And your goal always is to get yourself into a position where you can get control of the big, sharp sword so that you are then free to strike. And we see similar things with, similar, if you like, tactical progressions in most systems that follow on from there. I'm not suggesting that there's a lineage there, but it's just a common pattern we see.
Excellent. I have two questions on this system. The first one, the buckler, am I correct to say there are two major types, concave and convex shaped bucklers, both existed?
Oh, the range of bucklers is enormous.
Oh, enormous.
I've only got this one here, and this is a kind of fairly standard. But I mean, you can get square bucklers, you can get bucklers that are kind of wavy in cross section, you can get bucklers with spikes on them, you can get bucklers in the shape of a sort of weird sunburst star thing. You see that illustrated in Talhofer. Actually, I've got that here. I'll find a picture of it for you. This is the room with all the books and all the swords. Where are we? Okay, you can, let me see. Oh, there we go. There's a reason. Let me just adjust it so the camera can see it. There we go.
Oh, yes, I see that.
See that?
Ah, yeah. Looks like a star somehow. Right, understand.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say there's two types. I would say that the sources, generally speaking, don't. Then, generally speaking, the best way to put it. If the system is any good, small differences in the weapons don't matter.
No, of course not.
Right. So if your system only works with a 34.5-inch bladed sword that weighs exactly 1.1 kilos, then it's a crap system, right?
It is.
So with the bucklers, I'm sure that various museum professionals will have various classification systems for classifying bucklers, but from a practical perspective, if it's about the right size and is capable of protecting your hand and stopping a sword blow, buckler.
I fully agree with you now, because as you know, I also work for museums. Now, for example, like Persian shamshirs, now I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but people, many academics who have no idea about martial arts, they start classifying things. And I'm damn sure back then, they didn't classify the way we do today, oh, this is this. And I look at my colleagues and then I don't say anything, but when you don't practice martial arts, you come up with all those nice classifications,
Yeah. And from a artifact collection and classification point of view, it makes sense. I mean, you at Oakshott famously produced this fantastic classification system for medieval swords, and it's useful because if you're talking about a type 15 or a type 12A or whatever, they're different, and some swords are better adapted for thrusting, some better adapted for cutting, some are clearly single-handed swords, some clearly two-handed swords, and so on. So it's not a useless pursuit, but your art shouldn't depend on very specific tools.
Yeah. Just last question about this manuscript. Are they monks? They're dressed, the way monks were dressed. Am I correct?
Well, I'll show you. I mean, you knew I had a copy, right?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, this is an absolutely beautiful reproduction by a company called Extraordinary Editions, and these editions really are extraordinary. Shame that the better camera died. It does that occasionally. Let me angle it so you can see.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see that, right?
Yes,
okay. So, yeah, it's a monk who is shown by the tonsure. He's got a bald head.
Yes.
A ring of hair around his head, and his scholar who has his hood up. And the monk is training the scholar.
Yes.
To do these various actions.
Okay. Interesting. Very beautiful.
Yeah, that's a lovely book.
Okay, now the famous question comes. Do you teach longsword? I know.
A little bit. Of all the weapons I teach, it's definitely the one I am probably best known for.
Yeah.
So yes, I do. You mean this glorious thing?
Yeah.
I teach longsword.
Okay.
Rather, longsword teaches me.
Okay. Could you just show us some techniques with a longsword, just that our viewers get an idea? Just for example.
It's really difficult in here because it's a relatively low ceiling.
Oh no! Okay, no, just show the guards. No, just like guard.
Okay, so I mean, fundamentally, this is like a 4 feet long, 1 meter 40 or whatever, very sharp, pointy thing, and your goal always is to control your opponent's weapon and then strike. Okay, and there are lots of ways to do that. You can pommel strike, and you can grapple, and you can do all these other things, but the primary concern at the beginning of the fight is controlling your opponent's weapon. So whatever guard position they are in, you need to approach in such a way that you can bring them out of that position. Fiore calls that tasting the guards or breaking the guards. And then you cross their sword so you get control of it, and then you do the things that follow. Okay, so the guard positions include, let me just move the camera a little bit so you can see. So let's pop the rapier out of the way. Okay, so you've got low guards, so tutto porta di ferro, dentigiaro, colla longa. You've got posta breve in the middle, and then bicorno, which is, so from here, bicorno is most of the way to the extension, with this sort of turn in the hands. And then posta longa, which is the longest position, is the moment of full extension.
Yeah.
And then we have finestra, which is the window, frontale, the crown, posta di donna, the woman. And so, for example, if I'm striking from here, I might strike with a cut through posta longa into nittigingaro, from where you can return with a thrust into posta longa and a cut perhaps into tutto porta di ferro.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah? So the guards are the beginning, the middle, and or the ends of blows. And they have particular advantages and disadvantages. And some of them are held on either side, like posta di donna is on the right and on the left, finestra too. The lower guards, when you switch from one side to the other, they tend to change names. But actually there's a lot of sort of theories about why they're called what they are, because, you know, colla longa, the long tail, is held behind you like a tail. Well, that's fairly self-explanatory. And I suppose this is a bit like looking out of a window, only you're looking that way, so it's not that much like looking out of a window. But posta di donna, woman's guard, or the guard of the lady, makes no sense. But if you think of it in terms of medieval iconography, right, you have the pilgrim's path through life, where you have the long path that leads to heaven, hopefully, where you would find Mary Magdalene, sorry, Mary, Mother of Jesus, so Mary, who is the lady in the crown, or Mary Magdalene, the lady in the window. That's how she's often represented in medieval art. But on the long road, there's Bicorno, the two-horned guard, which is the devil that waits to trick you onto the short road, which leads down to hell, whereas Tutto Porta di Ferro, the iron gate, also the middle iron gate and the full iron gate, they're both iron gate. Behind this gate lurks a beast with Edinburgh, the boar's tooth, so a beast with a tusk and a tail. So a demon waiting to slaughter you or to torment you forever, right? Now, that's only a theory, but it fits all of the guards.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, how Fiore represents the information is very, very sophisticated, particularly when you consider that it's 600 years ago. Yeah. Okay, so there are all sorts of, like, he has this classic, he demonstrates his extraordinary education at every turn. For example, there's this beautiful 2-page spread in the manuscript which shows the blows of the dagger, 4 blows of the dagger. Let me grab a dagger, I'll show you. Hey, that's my best dagger. Oh, I must have put it away. Okay, this will do. Okay, so you've got 4 blows of the dagger, which are Madritto, forehand, reversal, backhand, fendente, straight down, and you have sottano from below. Okay? And on the same page, you have a picture of somebody holding somebody else's dagger, because their own is still in their belt, somebody holding a pair of keys, representing locks and counterlocks, somebody holding a pair of broken arms, like literally severed arms. He's just holding like these 2 arms, right? Representing basically limb destruction, so how to break arms. And then somebody standing on a vanquished wrestling opponent, right? Representing throws. Okay, so the dagger has the 4 blows, and then there are the 5 things he says you need to be able to do. You need to be able to do disarms, strikes, locks, breaks, and throws. Okay, those are the 5 things. But the way they're represented on the page, you've got the 5 things. There's one man with these 4 dagger attacks happening to him, right? And you've got these 4 other masters. When you think about it, there are 5 things you need to know of the dagger, and there are 4 blows. That's all represented on these pages. How many masters of the dagger are there through which you organize his author's dagger materials?
That's right.
There are 9. It's 5 plus 4.
That's right.
I mean, it is engineered to be memorable.
Fascinating.
Right. There's nothing mystical or magical about the numbers 5, 4, and 9. It's just he's presenting the information in a way that is designed for it to be memorized.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, just one more question before we move away from longsword. Why is longsword so popular in HEMA circles? Everyone seems to love it.
All right. Okay. Here's my theory. Okay, firstly, the longsword is fabulous. I mean, it is a glorious, glorious weapon. It's the archetypal sword in our culture, right? In sort of mainstream Western European culture, when a person thinks sword, they think something in the shape of a cross.
Yeah.
Okay, that I don't think is an accident. Right? I think that is closely related to how, you know, when the Christian church sort of took over Europe in the 11th century and expanded everywhere, then the idea of the sword being a cross kind of expanded with it, and so the Viking style sort of H-grip swords kind of gave way to the cruciform style swords. And there are theories there, but it's just theory. So the longsword, it is the sword that is most like a lightsaber. It is the sword that is most like the kind of swords that Aragorn would carry in Lord of the Rings, right? It is the classic knightly sword. So if you're into King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table, Excalibur kind of stuff, or if you're into Star Wars, or if you're into Lord of the Rings, or any kind of fantasy movie, really, it's that sword.
Yeah.
The close, yeah, that's the one. It's the one that really is embedded in our culture in a very sort of profound way. The rapier less so. I mean, the rapier is still like super important. 3 Musketeers, for instance. I mean, where would we be without the 3 Musketeers? Okay, but I think the longsword is the most popular weapon because it's the one that the most people want to do, because it's the one that feels the most swordy to most people.
And you can exercise lots of force with it, correct? When you strike.
Oh, but you can exercise lots of force with any sword.
Yeah. No, I mean, because it's two-handed, is it the reason?
Oh, yeah, you can hit really hard. Yeah, but I don't think that's it, because you can hit harder with the Polax.
No, of course, nothing can match the Polax. No, it's not.
Right, exactly.
Good answer.
Yeah. So I don't think it's just that. Also, because when you're fencing people, you know, in tournaments or whatever, you shouldn't be hitting that hard. It's not a full contact sport, because if it was, people would die.
Yeah, of course.
It's it's, I guess, at best semi-contact.
Yes, that's right.
That's how it needs to be fenced.
Yes.
Otherwise, really bad things happen.
Yes. Could you let's move on to side sword. Could you explain to our viewers, and could you show us a side sword? What is a side sword?
Oh, sure. A side sword is actually a neologism. It's in the 16th century sources, it's usually referred to as a spada da filo, an edge sword.
Oh, okay.
As in a sharp sword, or simply spada. Okay, and it is okay. Bear in mind there's huge variation in every type, but if this is a kind of classic longsword, let me come back a little bit so you can see. The blades are actually not dissimilar in length. So I put them on the floor. The cross guards are not dissimilar in length.
Exactly.
But the blade of the single-handed sword is slightly slimmer, and it has a somewhat more complex hilt. Okay, so this is a side sword, this is a long sword. And it's often fought with a buckler or with a dagger, but what even this fairly rudimentary hilt protection gives you is a little bit more freedom to send the blade out without first controlling your opponent's weapon. Because your hand is not that exposed. And it allows them to do actions you would never do with a longsword. So, for example, there are actions where if somebody cuts at you, you can simply enter in underneath the cut, and the cut comes down on the rings, and the sword goes into the body, and job's done.
Yes.
Yeah, it's popular from, I guess, late 15th century up until towards the end of the 16th. Okay. But rapier was really coming in from like the 1550s, 60s onwards. Generally speaking, the sources we have post-date the introduction of new swords by a decade or two, generally speaking.
What do you prefer, a side sword or a rapier? Personal preference. I'm not saying which one is better. I'm just asking for you, for your body mechanics.
Okay. For fencing my friends, rapier. If I had to pick one to wear, shall we say, for self-defense purposes in the mean streets of Verona in 1582, I would pick a side sword.
Could you tell us why?
It's a little bit more versatile. Okay. Blade is slightly shorter. It's better at cutting. You certainly can cut with the rapier, but it doesn't cut as well as a side sword will because it's not built that way. And the thing is, if you're in a sort of self-defense type situation, there may be multiple opponents, and you don't want to have your sword like 2 foot into somebody's guts while somebody else is swinging at you. You need to be able to. I mean, Vadi himself says, you know, if you're fencing more than one, if you're fighting multiple opponents, you want to use cuts, not thrusts, for that reason. Yeah, so your sword doesn't get stuck, basically. And so, yeah, it's a bit more. If you don't know what you're going to be doing, you need to have a multi-tool.
Yeah.
Right. If you know exactly what you're going to be doing, you want the specialized tool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So to my mind, this is a kind of multi-tool. I fence with this against long swords and against rapiers and against various other things, and it's fine in all those situations. I would prefer to have a long sword against a long sword. I would prefer to have a rapier against a rapier, but this does just fine in either of the situations. That if you think of it in terms of time, your long sword gives way to side sword, gives way to rapier. The side sword is actually doing pretty well, long sword against side sword, and it's doing pretty well, side sword against rapier.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Could you show us a rapier again, please?
Yeah, sure. Where'd I put it? That's not here.
That's fascinating.
Yes. This is a lovely, lovely sword.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, and its characteristics are primarily it's got a fairly narrow, very long blade. I mean, this has, I think it's like a 43-inch blade, something like that, which is not actually that long by rapier standards.
Yeah.
There were rapier blades with like 50-inch.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, in museums you see them, and I don't want to fight with that. How's it going to move? But it's this one has sharp edges, but if you can you see the cross section? It's kind of diamond cross section.
Yes.
It's quite a fat diamond, so it's got a fairly thick central ridge to keep it relatively rigid. And this is designed for going through, not bending. This is not a fencing weapon. My fencing rapier is here, and this is blunt, and this is flexible. It bends. You can't see.
For safety reasons.
Yeah. So this one will bend, but this one. God. I mean, I'm leaning my whole weight on it here.
Yeah, of course. Fascinating.